position everything. Got the. I made some Russian tea. It's perfect. I need the red pen though. I need some serious penage right here. Let's roll the cameras. You guys ready? Chevatron. From Russia though. Chubatron. Let's go e4 and let's try another Danish gambit. Will we finally have a Danish gambit is the key question here. Will we finally have a Danish gambit? It's called Nikolai the First. No, it won't. He goes d6. So he plays like a Philidor, kind of a Philidor type of move. And you guys might immediately see that white has the option of taking on e5 and taking on d8. That may seem good because you're depriving black of castling rights. And it's a good thing when your opponent loses castling rights. The problem with that, of course, is that you trade queens while doing so. And trading queens lessens the effect of losing castling rights. And in the name of playing aggressively, I want to keep the queens on the board, so let's not overthink it. Let's play knight f3, transposing to a Philidor. Bishop g4. And those of you with a good knowledge of chess history, this is how Philidor against Duke of Brunswick went. What should white do in this position? Do we take now, or is it still premature? So I'm leading you guys on a little bit, tricking you. It actually is not premature. This is the opera game. We do take on e5. What has changed? Well, you guys might say, well, what do you mean? D takes e5, D takes e5. And we can't take with a knight because queen takes queen is just checkmate. But after d, e, we can take their queen first. And what's changed is that now the e5 pawn is under fire by the knight. And black's only way to avoid losing a pawn, well, he loses a pawn, is to take on f3. And that is how the opera game continued. The opera game is probably the most famous game in chess history. It's Morphy against Duke of Brunswick and Count Isouard. I'm quite certain that many of you have seen it. It's also, in my opinion, one of the most overrated games in chess history, but the fact remains. And we win a pawn, we attack the bishop, and we threaten f7. He has to drop his bishop back. Whoa, that is an early resignation. Holy smokes, this guy was not happy. Maybe he's watching the stream, who knows? He's trying to sabotage me. Not acceptable. I demand that he take his resignation back. I do not accept his resignation. Well, what to say, guys? That's we take those, I guess. Now, one sec. Obviously, after e4, e5, d4, d6, just to illustrate what I was saying, this trades queens and black can no longer castle, right? But it should make intuitive sense that with the queens off the board, the king losing castling rights isn't quite as important, because king safety itself, while still very important, and it's very much possible to deliver checkmate in the endgame and to attack in the endgame, it's a lot harder to do so. So black is actually completely fine here. And this king can find a very nice home on c7. So what you'll often see in these positions is c6 followed by king c7. This pawn on c6 also limits the mobility of white's knight on c3. So the king can do this sort of semi-castling by hand, which renders this not very effective. So knight f3, bishop g4, and the best move for black here is to defend this pawn or to take on d4. Bishop g4 is considered a mistake. And so in this position, the Morphy game continued. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and now d takes e5. But now black has violated a key opening principle. He's moved a piece out twice and taken it for the knight. He's not developed at all. Neither is white, but white does have this queen on f3. And Morphy goes bishop c4. That threatens scholar's mate. And after knight f6 came a very famous move. Like, this move is the hallmark of the opera game, one of the hallmarks. What did Morphy play here? Yeah, a lot of you guys know this by heart. And you could sniff out the opera game while skydiving at 40,000 feet. I can certainly recite it, that kind of a condition. But queen b3. Forkovich, boom, boom. Black cannot defend both pawns at the same time. I will not show the full opera game right now. You guys can look it up. Just search opera game on Google. Do that right now if you haven't seen it. And play through it on one of 8 gazillion sites that have it. The reason that I think this game is overrated is because while it's a great illustration, it's a great game. It's a great illustration of certain themes. I show it to be, well, I don't teach a lot of beginners, but I think beginners should see it. But it shouldn't be treat it as like the only illustration of these concepts. It's a nice game. It's nothing out of the it's nothing crazy. And the opera was Norma. So the reason it's called the opera game is because it was played during a production of, I think it was Puccini's opera. I don't know whose opera, who wrote Norma, but Morphy was in Europe and he was invited by this count and these royal these aristocrats to attend an opera. Morphy got bored, as one would at the opera, and so he turned his back to the opera theater and they started playing this game. Anyways, it's a fantastic story, and there's some historical trivia behind it. And if you guys want that historical trivia, I can find it. Let me go back to full cam. I know you guys like chess history. Now I have a great website that has excellent chess scholarship. Let's see what I can find about it right quick. Okay. The Duke of Brunswick, with whom Morphy first dined on the 19th of September, this is from Edward Winter, chess historian, was a confirmed chess player, hardly to be seen otherwise than at chess. Edge, other historian, says that they were frequent visitors to the Duke's box at the Italian opera, and even there the Duke played chess. So what you guys should understand is that, like at ball games, the wealthy people and the owners have their own box. It's the same thing at the opera. They were frequent visitors to the Duke's box at the Italian opera, and even there the Duke played chess. On their first visit in October, they played chess throughout the entire performance of Norma. Edge mentions Morphy's discomfort when he was the Duke's guest, since he was obliged to sit with his back to the stage while facing the Duke and Count Isor consulting against him. So he was afraid other people would think he's an asshole for not even looking at the opera theater, but turning his back on it and playing chess. Okay, so on November the 2nd, they heard the Barber of Seville, during which Morphy played his most famous game. No, actually, there seems to be debate about which opera they were listening to. And this chess historian undertakes an investigation to find out. Some people say it's Norma, some people say it's the Barber of Seville. And he does this long investigation. And he finds tickets from that season of the opera. And where was this game played, actually? Let me see. I think it was in Italy. I'm not sure. Was it in Austria? Where exactly was it? Yeah, anyways. It was in Paris. Wait, where was it? Frequent visitors. Norma was also performed on 9th and 20th of December. It appears that Morphy versus the Count of the Duke was played either during a performance of Norma, but most probably during the Barber of Seville on 4th November 1858. So Edward Winter, who is my favorite chess historian, he thinks that it actually was played during the Barber of Seville. Rossini, I think. Anyways, that's a little bit of chess history for you. Let's get back to the speedrun. Whoops, wrong scene. Now, in the game, of course, our opponent takes, and knight takes c5 happens, and he shouldn't have resigned. I think he resigned because he thought this was a fork, but after bishop e6, while black is in big trouble, he can play, and it's really only a pawn down, then you can chase the knight away, and you can keep developing. Any questions about this game? One day we will get a chance to play the Danish. Promise you. Okay, looks like we're all good. Let's get the next game underway. And we got another wet against Feyer's GG. Let's go e5. Or e4. And, well, we got another stab at it, d4. And this time he goes c6. So still, our opponents are just not responding to this particularly well. And c6 is not a good move for many reasons, one of which is it takes away the c6 square from the knight. The other is that it just doesn't defend the pawn. I mean, so we just take the pawn. Now, he can win the pawn back. Can anybody find a move that forcibly wins the e5 pawn back? And he finds it, actually. Queen a5 check. Which is kind of funny. But this forks the pawn and the queen. Now, the issue with this is, of course, that he's using his queen for all of this. He's not developing his pieces. And he's allowing me to develop mine. So how should we block this check? What is the best way to block this check? So most of you are saying knight c3, which is correct. Some of you are saying bishop d2. Bishop d2 is very tempting because it's with tempo, right? It attacks the queen. The problem with bishop d2 is that he's going to move his queen anyway. He's going to take his pawn. So you don't need to push the queen toward the pawn. And the issue with bishop d2 is that that's not where you want your bishop. It's a very passive square. So knight c3 is a better way to defend against the check. And after queen takes c5, how shall we continue? Yeah, also the knight defends the e4 pawn, which is good. Knight f3. Definitely. And now we have two pieces developed. We attack his queen. The development advantage balloons. And again, he's really hurt by the fact that he can't get his knight out at all, because both development squares are blocked by pawns. Okay. So if I were black, I would play queen c. Well, he goes queen e6. I think his idea is that he's trying to prevent me from playing bishop c4. He's gonna just take my bishop. But that queen is also really in the way. And in the name of playing very aggressively, we're going to sort of violate a rule. Now, some of you may be thinking along the lines of playing bishop f4 or bishop d3, but when you're ahead in development, you can afford to take certain liberties that you otherwise couldn't have taken, right? We already have both of our knights developed, so we don't actually need to get obsessed with developing all of our pieces as quickly as possible. And if you take a close look at his queen, you will see that it allows us to mount a very quick attack on the f7 pawn. A lot of you guys are seeing the move. Thank you, Jay Forrester. The move is knight g5. It sort of manufactures our own fried liver, right? Knight g5 attacks the queen, and then we can follow up with bishop c4. So, you know, if there's a good reason to move the same piece more than once in the opening, this is where we sort of begin to strategically violate the rules. Okay, knight g5, queen e5. There definitely is, I think, a temptation to play f4, but that's a little bit counterproductive because it weakens the king, it prevents the bishop from developing, and it allows the queen to sort of depart to leave the center, which is not a good thing for us because we can continue to use the queen to accelerate the pace of our development. So let's play bishop c4. I hope that makes sense. And I've been making this kind of refrain several points throughout these early games, which is that you want to be very careful about making moves just because they threaten one of your opponent's pieces, or just because they create a threat. People often equate threats with a move being good, but that isn't necessarily the case. Okay, b5. Now, what should we take on f7? Well, this is actually not the easiest question because some of you may be attracted to knight takes f7 and think, well, this gives a fork to the queen and the rook. But if you calculate a little bit further, right, knight takes f7, he moves the queen away. He moves it to e7, for example. And if you take the rook, then what is black going to do? And can somebody explain to me why that is a little bit messy? Because he takes the bishop, and then the knight is trapped, and he might get two pieces for a rook. But as a little bit of an introduction to calculation, when you're calculating a variation, when the variation doesn't work, you don't want to go back to the start and consider the next candidate move. What you really want to do is you want to go back to the last moment at which you had a choice. Last moment at which you had a choice. The last moment at which you had a choice is not knight takes f7, it's actually knight takes rook. You got to ask yourself, well, is that move forced? So if we think about it for a second, after knight f7, queen e7, do we have to take the rook? Are we in a hurry? Exactly, we aren't. We can move the bishop to b3. The knight will still be protected, and then we take the rook. And at most, he's going to win that knight, probably for a couple of pawns. And even then, we're going to be up in exchange and a bunch of pawns. So, the algorithm of calculation often takes the form of calculating an entire line and then going back to the start and looking at the next candidate move. But instead, you want to go back to the last moment. It's sort of iterative. I think computer scientists can make the proper analogy here. There's almost, something recursive about it, I guess. Probably not using that term well. I struggle with it in my CS classes. Yeah, it's backtracking. So I hope that makes sense. Because often we assume that certain moves are forced, and certain lines leave a bad taste in your mouth. You're like, damn, you know, this doesn't work because he takes the bishop. And so we're almost emotionally rejecting the line rather than approaching it analytically and just saying, all right, let me uncouple my emotions from the calculation. Bishop f7 is perfectly good. Yeah, bishop f7 is also pretty much crushing. It's crushing for a different reason, and he gives us a queen. It's crushing for a different reason, and I'll show that after the game. But I just wanted to sort of display this particular concept. Okay, so here, you know, there's this line to be drawn when you're up a queen. I've warned again and again about not taking too much extra material and instead focusing on important things like development. At the same time, that doesn't mean you should refrain from taking stuff that's literally free. So there's many ways to win this position. And the sort of most obvious one is queen h5 check. And if he goes g6, we could have also gone knight back to f7, reached back into the treasure chest and pulled out a rook. But what is the idea after g6? Very typical concept here. Yeah, knight takes g6, of course. hg6, then we take the rook and just vacuum everything up the 8th rank. Yeah, so he goes there. We can give a check on f7. And after king c7, we have a very pretty mate in 2. Very pretty mate in 2. And again, to come back to how I see this, honestly, it's the fact that I have solved tons of these mate in 2s, mate in 3s throughout my life. The first one is to swing the queen over to a5 and deliver the check. Bring the king to b7. And then the mate itself is very pretty. Does anybody see it? Does anybody see the mate? Nice. Knight d8 is mate. Not knight d6 because the bishop defends that square. But knight d8. All right. So let's go through the game. So e4, e5, d4, c6. We took the pawn. He goes queen a5 check. Knight c3. Again, bishop d2 attacks the queen. But that bishop is super awkward, and now he attacks 2 pawns at once. We can go knight c3 here, but then we've, in effect, played bishop d2, which doesn't make much sense, right? So here, 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 queen e6, and now knight g5, which is a very aggressive move. Now, if we had chosen the more conventional development approach, we could have gone bishop d3, just supporting the pawn. We could have gone bishop f4, getting the bishop out this way. There's a bunch of stuff that we can do, but in the name of playing very aggressively, we decided on knight g5 and bishop c4. Now, what would have been black's best move here? What would have been black's best move here? Yeah, d5. So a lot of you guys, eagle-eyed folks, spotted this during the game, and d5 is a very strong defensive move because not only does it open the bishop, it also this attacks the bishop. You cannot take on d5 because of the pin. What should white do in this position? To be honest, my idea was just to drop the bishop back, and then castle. And the funny thing is, this looks very intimidating for us. Like, oh damn, you know, I missed d5. But think of it this way: once you castle, the fact that black's pawn is on d5 is a huge blessing because it may allow you to take on d5 and open the e file. So even if black plays h6, right, you can just drop the knight back to f3 and watch what happens. Queen c7, well, for queen c7 you can take on d5, but if queen e7, I mean, look at the development advantage. It's 3 on 0, and black is just completely a sitting duck. And now the fact that black's pawn is on d5 is what kills him even faster because the e file is about to get opened, right? So what this shows is that these moves like d5, which make a lot of noise, and they attack a piece, they exploit a pin, oftentimes they need to be responded to in very quiet ways. And this also shows really the importance of these general principles. They exist for a reason. Things like development advantages are important, and concept of looking for open files. All of these things really do matter. And when you look at these top-level games, you may get the impression that we've all sort of moved on collectively from chess principles. That's definitely not the case. Okay. So b5, now bishop f7 check would have been good as well. And the mechanism of this is that after king d8, you should immediately the alarm bells should immediately start to ring, because I'm noticing this. The knight and the queen are, king and the queen are a knight's distance apart, and currently the bishop is parked on that square, but you can send the valet and then you can move the bishop away. Where can you move it? If you're moving the bishop, you might as well take something out with you. You can take the knight, and black has to move the queen away. Black is busted here. If he takes, then knight f7 is a fork. And so king e7 is essentially forced. And here, and this is the kind of position actually where I think players tend to struggle, because it's not immediately clear how white should continue, and that's part of the reason. That's right. That's GM has. It's part of the reason that that I didn't take with the bishop. Are you trying to flatter me, GM has? So probably the computer's move here is different from what I'm going to suggest. What did I say just now about Swanky Tiger? Thank you for the sub. What did I just now say about situations where you're unsure of what to do or you're a little bit scared? Sometimes you need to go back to the very simple moves. Can I make just a developing move? Can I make a general improving move? So just castle. Just castling here is, you're not going to go wrong with this. Now black can play h6. I'm quite sure that some of you are seeing this and thinking, well, this is very bad because he attacks the knight. If we move the knight, then he takes the bishop. But if you look a little bit more carefully at this, and if you remember that there's a good reason that we left the queen on e5. We left it so that we could use it as sort of a punching bag. When we need it, we go knight f3. And we attack the queen moves. And remember, we're up a pawn, and the king is ruined, and black is completely busted. Then we can even move our bishop away, refocus our attacking energy, and then attack in one of 80 different ways. So that would have been the mechanism, bishop f7. I think knight f7 is probably the better move, even objectively. And again, if he moves his queen, we just drop the bishop back, and then we take the rook at our leisure. Tetsuo's grid, thank you. Does that make sense? I mean, of course, he blundered the queen, but at that point, it became pretty academic. Any questions about this game? Why not bishop b3 before knight f7? Well, here you give black a chance to defend this pawn with knight h6. And you can no longer take on f7. It's very important to make that move first and trap the rook, and then move the bishop back. Move order is quite important in these cases. What about f4 after castle? F4 after castle? Oh, you mean h6, f4 instead of knight f3? Well, f4 is fine. It wouldn't solve the underlying issue of the knight being hanging and the king making contact with the bishop. It would actually help black move the queen away. If that makes sense. Min, thank you for the raid, party of 75. Thank you, Min. Thank you. And sorry we didn't continue. I'm finishing myself very, very soon. So Lucky Morning Star, the point of knight f3 is to attack the queen, right? If king takes bishop, then we take the queen. And so the queen, black has to attend to that threat. Why not d4, asks Soren SP after d5, bishop e3? Because d4 reopens the bishop's diagonal and allows knight takes f7, forking the queen and the rook. And it's the same idea as when we took knight takes f7. Okay, let's play the next game.